sure this is streaming before I start. I hope my last thing did. Yeah, okay. Bad time to find that out. Alright. That's telling me that's running. Cool. Ah. Oop, wrong one. Damn it. There. So, um, even though we didn't have many people show up last week, I still needed to record for my online class. So, we did the first part of chapter 5, which was the first part of the late Republic into the Empire. We're not quite to the Empire yet, but we are getting there. Went over the Guraki brothers, Jugurtha, Gaius Marius, Sulla, and then Cicero here. And also, as I mentioned last time, Cicero, I always like bringing up Cicero because in my, I think it was my first semester of grad school, I took a classical America course, and it was basically like foundational America stuff, founding fathers and blah blah blah, and a lot of it was how they took ideas from ancient Greece, which is mostly Athens, and like Republic Rome, to make early America. But like more so than just that, the founding fathers were a bunch of freaking dweebs. When they would write to each other, they would use pen names, which, okay. And thinking about it now, like when I was young, I remember pen names even then seemed pretty anachronistic. But today it's like that's just like an old version of today's, like, your screen name or whatever your username is on whatever platform you're using. But that's just like what you're writing by. I don't know why they did that, but that was just a thing. And I bring that up to say, Thomas Jefferson, if I remember right, Thomas Jefferson used Cicero as his pen name because all the founding fathers, well, not all of them, most of the founding fathers chose like different orators and speakers and great thinkers from the classical era as their pen name because they were a bunch of freaking nerds. And I want to say Thomas Jefferson was the one that picked Cicero. So yeah, just a little thing to toss out there. It was something else. The people have not changed much. Yeah. So, also, I mean, I recently ran across a list of insults from Shakespeare's plays, and other than it being, like Middle English, it's pretty modern. Okay, so we talked about Cicero last time. Had this dust up with Catiline. Catiline tried to literally murder the consuls and take over Rome because he felt snubbed. Um, yeah, so things weren't going great in Rome. There's Cicero. So, on to the big one. On to really the shift from Republic to Empire, and it is very much one man. Um, so there was this. It was later called the Caesarian faction, but at the time it was called the Consular faction, formed by Pompey, Caesar, and Crassus as a power block in the Senate. We talked about Pompey and Crassus earlier. Um, Pompey and Crassus were previous consuls. Pompey for being at the right place at the right time to stop the remnants of Spartacus' rebellion, and Crassus for being like the richest man in Rome at the time, who had like 7 armies at his beck and call, and who crushed most of Spartacus' rebellion. So they both became consuls for that. And Caesar was just like a really good general. So they decided they'd help each other out if and when one of them took political power. So if and when one of the 3 of them became consul, they would do things to help the other 2. So 3 in charge, or 3 working together. All of them had pretty good political clout, and as long as one of them becomes one of the 2 consuls, they will aid the other 2. And Caesar was more than just a good general. I mean, I did sort of just throw that there. He was just a good general. He already had been doing a lot politically. He used gladiator games and free grain to get the regular people on his side, and to lessen the power of the Senate over him. Because again, even if you are this amazing general, the Senate still holds all the cards. They're still the ones with the power. But if he has literally all the people in Rome backing him up, voting for what he wants, and with him against the Senate, he can do much more. So he's becoming popular with the people, even if the Senate isn't so sure about him. So he became consul in 59 BCE, and mostly did his own thing. Again, consuls are supposed to work together. One goes off and does war stuff. The other one stays home and works with the Senate. But he used his power to give himself a longer term, which, again, probably almost definitely illegal. And then led armies into Gaul to carve out lots of territory for Rome and lots of glory for himself, which, as we know, is the main thing for Romans, is you gain glory and you're basically making yourself immortal, relatively speaking. And considering we still talk about Caesar today, yeah, he's pretty much achieved that. Gaul, by the way, is essentially where modern-day France is. There were some really amazing battles up in Gaul. Some pretty significant strategies that were written about once he got back. One where Caesar was besieging a stronghold in Gaul. So he had basically built. They had built an entire, you know, like emplacement around this fortress, and were doing their best to starve out the settlement. And then one of Caesar's men informed him that reinforcements were coming, but they weren't theirs. Reinforcements were coming to break the siege to aid the Gauls. So there's a couple things that can occur at this point. A lot of times the best course of action is to just get the hell out of there, because you don't want to turn and fight a group of guys that are coming in when you've got a whole fort full of guys that want you dead behind you. Or you can like move to the side and just fight all of them at once, because the guys that are in the fort have to come out, so they're going to lose their defensive advantage. Or you can do what Caesar did, and he built his own fortifications around his siege. So he continued the siege while being besieged by the Gauls that were coming to break his siege. So that was crazy. So yeah, he was something else. Meanwhile, Pompey and Crassus both became consuls. Pompey managed to get a little bit of land over in Spain. Crassus lost 7 legions in Syria and his own life. And Crassus has a pretty famous death. I don't know if have you heard of the way Crassus reportedly died? So now this is supposedly, this is one of the like things that happened in history that maybe didn't really happen, because this is something that definitely happened before and was reported on, and that supposedly happened to Crassus because it was a karmic death that would have been, that if it did happen, would have been really, really funny, sort of. I mean, it also was really horrible, but like it would have been an amazing karmic death if it happened. So supposedly, Crassus was captured by the Syrians, and because he was seen as like the epitome of Roman greed and wealth, the Syrian leader decided to feed him gold. And by that I mean they took molten gold and poured it down his throat. Yeah. So apparently, I looked this up just because I was curious. Apparently, that did happen to another like Roman official before, like 20 or 30 years before, and that is like on record as having happened. And then Crassus was killed later, and the two sort of merged, I think. And it might have happened to Crassus. Like, they might have heard about this first one and been like, hey, we should do that to this guy because, you know, yada, 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 richest guy in Rome, blah, blah, blah. Or it might not have ever happened, and the two just sort of blurred over time. but I like to think that that's how the guy got ended. So here we have the three of them. They're often called the first triumvirate. Um, the book doesn't call them that because a triumvirate ends up becoming an official term, but this group was not official. This was just a faction of three. Triumvirate, well, I just went ahead and said it. It's a faction of three. It's three dudes working together as the political bloc. And while Caesar, Pompey, and Crassus working together were just three dudes working together, as we're going to see going forward, this becomes something that's like just part of Rome for a little while. So the idea of a triumvirate does become official. In fact, I mean, you're literally the only person that this means anything to. But due to, I think it's one of my vanilla expanded mods, but like that's the ideology leadership thing that I've got going on in RimWorld now is a triumvirate. So I'm like, okay, well, I guess we're Roman now. It's working so far. I got 3 people running the show, and they're not killing each other, so that's good. Not yet. I do have people coming in that are trying to convert them, and we'll see what happens. As long as we're not cannibals yet. So yeah, there's Gaul. Again, just like modern day central France. Not like all of France, but I mean, you know, there's Aquitaine, there's Romana? Oh, Roman province. And then what would become Belgium. I mean, that's literally like all the stuff's already there. We just took Roman names, which, considering, you know, France is a offshoot of Latin language, so it works. So, I think the book. Let's see, how the books put it. Oh no, it doesn't say it this way. So I remember I read somewhere where like a three-legged stool is very stable, but once you cut off one leg, you're on the ground. And that's how the triumvirate works, is once one guy's gone, the other two are absolutely not working together. Which I don't know why it had to be that way, but that's how it ended up working. 52 BCE, the Senate only elected Pompey as consul, which, again, isn't really how things typically work, but sure, let's do that. And then they worked to limit Caesar's power because I guess they were afraid of Caesar having too much power. They sent out 2 legions to arrest him in 49. Caesar, though, was not going to just go quietly into the annals of history. Instead, he crossed the Rubicon River, which is the border between Gaul and Italy, which was essentially him declaring war on the Senate. That's why, if you're not familiar, that's why crossing the Rubicon is a phrase, even today. It's once you cross, supposedly there was this whole thing where he stopped at the banks of the river and he talks to his men. He's like, once we cross the Rubicon, once we cross this river, there's no turning back. Because crossing the river is essentially declaring war on Rome. You know, is the point of no return, so to speak, crossing the Rubicon. You make this choice, and that's it. So crossed into Rome, ignited civil war. Pompey and the Senate fled Rome like the brave men they were. And Caesar occupied the city. So, yeah, not much of a civil war, really. Finally, Caesar made his way to Greece, where Pompey and the Senate had fled to. In July of 48 BCE, Pompey had a much larger force, but Caesar was clearly the better general. Whipped Pompey at the Battle of Pharsalus. Pompey fled to Egypt, wrong E. Pompey fled to Egypt, and the Egyptians greeted him by beheading him, because they knew what was going on. And they weren't going to shelter a guy that's running from Caesar, because they knew what Caesar was about. So here is Caesar crossing the Rubicon with his lads. Again, very dramatically, once you reach the other shore, we'll have made our choice, etc., etc. For some reason I have that picture twice. I don't know what I did with that, but anyway, there it is. So he hung out in, by the way, defeated Pompey at the Battle of Pharsalus in 48. Pompey fled to Egypt. Caesar did follow him, and the Egyptians presented him with Pompey's head. And Caesar stuck around. Should be noted that we're pretty sure Cleopatra had at least one kid with Julius Caesar. So, just FYI. Because this was, like, again, this was in 48 BC. It wasn't until 45 that he went back to Rome. So he was hanging out in Egypt for a little while. So he went back to Rome, was named dictator for 10 years, which, just to remind everybody, you're only allowed to be dictator for 1 year, and that's in the case of like a military emergency. He decided, 10 years isn't really long enough. Let's make that for life. Why not? He also was Pontifex Maximus, which is to say the high priest, tribune, and consul. He also stated, though, I am not king, I am Caesar, essentially equating his name to the title. Because, remember, Rome didn't like kings. Rome had kicked the kings out of their city back with the Etruscans. But they could have all this other stuff. They could have a dictator, a guy that's also the high priest, tribune, consul, basically everything, all the leaders at once. But not king. Can't be that. Revamped lots of issues in Rome, gave land to the soldiers in Gaul, created a new calendar system. He's the reason we have July. So, again, real humble guy, this Julius Caesar. Named a whole month after himself. He's part of the reason why, for example, we're here in October now. October's the 10th month, but if you know your Latin, it's supposed to be the 8th month. Oct is 8. It was originally the 8th month. Um, July pushed us down a month, and we got another one coming up that's going to push us down too. So, thanks for that, Julius Caesar. He was stabbed to death on the Ides of March, March 15th, 44 BC, by a group of men who included his former allies, in particular Brutus, who was his adopted son. I think Brutus was also his nephew, but he was his adopted son because of the whole Roman patriarchy thing. Because supposedly, as he was dying, he said to, or he saw Brutus, and he said, et tu, Brute, which is to say, and you, Brutus, you're also here, literally stabbing me in the back, or at least in the face. And that was seen as this big betrayal to him, besides the fact that he was stabbed something 33 times or whatever. Now, that said, one of Caesar's loyalists, Mark Antony, was not informed of the plot, and this would cause quite a bit of trouble for the conspirators, because Mark Antony was cool with what Caesar was up to. And actually, in addition to this image that I had to include for my own sake, I think it was just, hell, it might have just been yesterday. I saw an image of one of those knife holders you got in a kitchen, the knife block, but it was a bust of Julius Caesar. Anyway, there's Caesar getting shanked on the Senate floor. One of the reasons why, supposedly, and I say supposedly because so much of the writing at this time was so frantic and there's a lot of contradictory stuff because passions were running very high. And so much of the really specific minute stuff you can't be too sure on. So I'm saying supposedly because I don't want to be too specific. But it is said that the reason why Caesar was stabbed so many times is that the conspirators said that in order to prove your loyalty to this whole plan, you have to get excuse me. You have to get blood on your knife, essentially. You have to get a stab in. So there was 2-3 dozen dudes in this conspiracy, or at least 2 dozen, and they all had to get at least one stab in. A few of them got a few more. If you stabbed and didn't get blood the first time, you're going to stab again. He got mauled. It was real bad. I mean, whether or not you believe that it was good that Caesar died, it's still a rough way to go. So Mark Antony came back, or came back to Rome. He had been out doing, I don't know, official Roman business. Um, uh, so he started legitimizing Caesar's reforms to keep Rome from just descending into chaos, but also tried to have his assassins forgiven to again try to prevent Rome from descending into chaos. However, Cicero, being the big mouth that he was, publicly denounced Mark Antony's actions and had to flee Rome. Because if you publicly denounce the actions of a leader who is in charge of everything, he's going to send the soldiers around to give you a gentle knifing. Also, Octavian, who was Caesar's nephew and also adopted son, that was the guy that was the nephew and adopted son. Brutus was just like Caesar's protege, maybe, but also adopted son. Like, you had a lot of adopted because of the clientage system. Anyway, Octavian marched on Rome with an army because the Senate wouldn't make him consul. So what do you do when the Senate doesn't do what you want? You apparently just bring your army into Rome. They changed their mind and let Octavian be consul. So Octavian, who had apparently been following his uncle's exploits, formed the first official triumvirate. He had Mark Antony because, again, Mark Antony was the one that had been doing everything so far, as well as Lepidus, who was a former governor of Spain. I don't know, just like a third guy. So this faction was officially recognized by the Senate and given official power. So, yeah, rather than people being consuls now, it was a triumvirate. It was a council of three. Main article was to get rid of enemies of the state, which is to say Caesar's assassins and also Cicero, because again he was a big mouth and he was causing issues among the populace. So by 42 BC, Caesar's killers had been dealt with. And the triumvirate split the empire into three parts. Lepidus was given Africa, which is to say mostly like Africa sort of included southern Spain, but then also like a brain almost so Constantinople, that's not right. Carthage. Mark Antony was given the east, which included Egypt, and so like also, the Persia area. And Octavian was given the west, which is to say Italy and probably like Gaul and stuff. So you can tell who's being given preferential treatment just based on what they're getting. I mean, you can also tell who's getting preferential treatment just based on who doesn't have a bust of their face made. Lepidus, he's at least on a coin, but we don't have any intact. Well, okay, I can't say that. I didn't find any intact busts of Lepidus's face. So, in this picture of Octavian, Mark Antony, and Lepidus, they chose to have a picture of Lepidus on a coin, and in my mind that means that's probably the only image we have of him. Or maybe the sculptures just suck, and that's the best picture we have of him. So, the triumvirate didn't last very long. Now, this wasn't because some idiot got himself killed, or I should say, some idiot got his legions killed and then got gold poured down his throat. Octavian didn't really have much use for the triumvirate once they split Rome apart. He forced Lepidus to retire, which just want to take a step back here and look at everything that's happened to Roman leaders so far. That's a pretty good way to go. Just have, even if you're part of this supposedly equal trio of people, if you're Lepidus, you know that you're the bottom rung of this trio. You're the least most powerful of these guys. And Octavian's probably the top. Octavian and Mark Antony were pretty equal, but Octavian's probably the strongest because he's in charge of Rome, right? So Octavian comes to visit you in Spain or sends you a letter or whatever, and he's like, hey, I need you to retire. Your answer is, yeah, okay. All right, sure. That sounds like a peaceful way of not dying. So Lepidus retires, lives on to die of natural old age, I guess, or maybe he died of disease. I don't know. The book doesn't go into details because he's gone now. He doesn't matter, but he's not dead, which is a good thing for him. And then Octavian set out to destroy Mark Antony. Antony, though, had made himself a bit of an easy target, as he had gotten entangled with the Egyptian princess Cleopatra. Again, we're just going to ignore that Julius Caesar had as well, but propaganda doesn't care about the truth. And it appeared, at least to the propaganda that Octavian was putting out, that he had come under the spell of this foreign royalty. By the way, now, I'm not going to get into the arguments that the weird online racists get into, but, Cleopatra was mostly Greek by this point, because, as we've mentioned, Egypt was run by the dynasty of, oh shoot, I forgot his name. One of Alexander's generals since the time of Alexander. So, by the time of Cleopatra, even if she wasn't pure Greek, which she wasn't, but she was at least part Greek, because they were the ruling class. So any royalty within Egypt was at least partially interbred with the Greek royal, or the Greek ruling family. So them treating Cleopatra like some exotic foreign power is, again, it's just propaganda. Because they treated the Greeks like they were this grand holy grail of civilization, but because the Egyptians are brown, oh no. Right? So, eventually this resulted in a battle off of Actium in Greece in 31 BCE. Octavian was victorious in this battle. Cleopatra and Mark Antony retreated to Egypt, were both committed suicide. I don't remember how Mark Antony did. I think he drank poison, or maybe just stabbed himself. Supposedly Cleopatra, again, this is dramatic and it's been told a million times, but it's also like most famously in Shakespeare, so I don't know how accurate it is. But supposedly, she like locked herself in a room with a bunch of poisonous snakes, and they bit her or whatever, um, and that's how she committed suicide. So yeah, so there's a Shakespeare book, and then this movie based on the book that was from like I think the 60s when a bunch of these movies came out. A bunch of these like surprisingly well-made movies, I should say. Like obviously you can tell from like the picture quality, it's old, but in terms of like direction and makeup and practical effects, like these were good freaking movies. This was similar to what was the movie called? What's just called Moses? Like the 6 hour long, or was it called Exodus? It was called Exodus. Yeah, that like really freaking long Moses movie from like the 60s or 70s. Um, but and again, you can tell the special effects are dated, but like it's still really good, especially for that time. But even looking back from modern day stuff, you can't beat practical effects. Come on. And I mean, the acting is really passionate, and it's just you can't beat that stuff. That said, I've not actually seen Antony and Cleopatra, but just looking at that, I'm like I've seen this era of movie. This is also like the original Planet of the Apes era, like just based on yeah. Hey, did you also get like yeah? It was like almost a month of just Planet of the Apes clips. I don't know what was going on with YouTube. Not that I minded, because I've seen all the old movies, and they were also really good. But it's like, okay, let's watch all the movies just on YouTube Shorts. Anyway, so the Republic was dying. Uh, and people wanted something that Octavian could give them. Peace. Because everything was on fire, sometimes literally. And Octavian told them that only through giving him absolute power could they have peace. So he ordered the now empire into a very rigid, controlled structure. Also gave himself a new title, Augustus, which is based on the Latin word auctoritas, or authority, over the state. This is where we get August. So it's also this guy's fault. Why October is the 10th month and December, Dec, is the 12th month. Yeah, real rigid controlled, guys. You just screwed up our year. Anyway. He created the Praetorian Guard, served as the Empire's personal bodyguard, which is great because the Praetorian Guard ended up murdering a lot of emperors. Now, he did, at least on paper, reinstate the Senate and the Republic, while also giving himself more and more power and having the Senate sign off on it. So the Senate and the Republic were there, but like it was just window dressing. The Empire was very much in power now. I mean, because throughout the Empire, the Senate still existed. It was just there. So here's a picture of Octavian as Augustus. um, with this awful little cherub baby down here representing his supposed link to divinity, because he was just as I didn't really go into Caesar being. He wasn't as obsessed with divinity as like Alexander the Great was, but he did still have this belief that um, he had this connection to divinity, and also, actually no, we're gonna get into that in a second, because there's. We're gonna talk about belief, I think. Yeah. Okay. And it's Praetorian Guard. Again, awful little creepy cherub baby face as like a representation of spiritual or whatever, the gods. All right, I was about to get ahead of myself, but hey, here it is. So, the empire is continuing to expand, and it's absorbing more and more cultures, more and more people, and more religions. So, while before Rome had just taken in whatever gods everyone around them believed in and just put up statues to them and altars and whatnot, things had gotten a little out of hand. They had too many gods, because while they sort of had the same mindset as the Greeks, where it's like, okay, well, you're just using different names for the same, it wasn't quite that simple. They did still have separate. They did still separate out like different gods and belief systems and whatnot. So, to say the least, things were getting crowded in Rome. So to fix things, Augustus created a cult of emperors. So there was this idea that Caesar had become a god. Apparently, you get stabbed a bunch in the Senate and you become a god. And he allowed provincials, which is to say the people in the provinces, especially those in the east, to worship him, to worship Caesar specifically. Because we go all the way back to Alexander the Great, or even before that, talking about Persia. If you remember, the Persian king was seen as a god, and all of his subjects were basically slaves. So the idea for many people east of Greece was that whoever's running the empire, whoever's running the show, is basically a god. So to twist that slightly to our leader rose to godhood is really easy for the people in, say, Persia to understand, because that's like, okay, well, that's just one step beyond what we do anyway. And for like the Romans, yeah, that makes sense. That works. So it worked enough for everybody. It was a good middle ground. There was also the issue with the Jews, because it's history and we're talking about religion. They were largely tolerated in Rome, but they often had issues in Greece, which had them labeled as troublemakers. Eventually, in 66 BCE, they rebelled in Jerusalem, during which Emperor Titus put them down and looted the city, which I've got I think it's a column built in Titus's honor that's got like the stuff they were looting, and just very obviously they're like carrying out this giant menorah thing. So yeah, I think that's what it's called. Now, obviously, as we're getting close to the turn of the millennium, or at least the switch over, obviously they weren't using this dating system back then. Christianity came about at this time, but it was largely ignored. It was seen as just like a superstition or just like a sect of Judaism. But not really as any true religion. I mean, there's these dudes that are like following this faith healer around, and he gets in trouble with the Jewish authority, and it's enough that the Roman authority in the area is like, yeah, I mean, technically, what he's saying could be seen as going against the Roman authority. So yeah, we'll string him up on a cross. Why not? And then after that, they're like, oh, he came back. It's like, okay, these guys are nuts. Whatever. And there's like a few hundred of them at any time, so they were mostly ignored. Like the whole Romans persecuting Christians thing doesn't come until much later. Well, later, not too much later. Anyway, here's Julius Caesar becoming a god, I guess. I don't know why he's got dudes like riding on his back, but whatever. Here is the sack of Jerusalem. Lot of stuff happening here besides the temple being on fire. People being thrown off this really high staircase just onto the stones below. But also this dude here just like seeing who he can hit before they hit the ground. That seems unnecessary. Here we go. There's the carrying the loot back from Jerusalem. Bible.ca. I guess that's Canada. Man, they really jumped on that URL early. They got Bible.ca. All right, let's get a few rulers in here while we've got time. All right. So the initial successors, those that took power after Augustus, were his extended family. Those are the Julio-Claudian lines. So, whatever. His family and the extended family. So first we had Tiberius. He restored some of the Senate's power because he really didn't. It seems like he didn't really want to rule. He spent most of his time on the island of Capri or Capri, depends on the historian, because I often show a video about Caligula, and they say the island of Capri, but also the woman has kind of a British accent, so I don't know. Delegated his rule to a soldier named Sejanus, but Sejanus was eventually murdered. Supposedly, Capri was this like island of debauchery and decadence, and like it was everything you ever hear about how uh, bad Rome was. That was Capri. Um, and being raised there uh, was Caligula, and Caligula uh, was basically always in fear of for his life. His family had been killed by Tiberius, and Tiberius was keeping him close in order to make sure that he didn't try to plot against him. Um, so when Tiberius took over, he was real bad, to put it simply. So let's see. Among other things, he seduced his sisters, wanted to make his favorite horse a senator, had a shrine dedicated to himself in which the clothes of the statue would be changed to what he was wearing that day. Um, Eventually, the Praetorian Guard got rid of him. Yeah. So when this went down, the Praetorian Guard didn't just kill Caligula. Well, let me first just. There is Tiberius at Capri. I don't know who this dude, and I don't know who this shining person is in the robes. Why they look all Jesus-y, but here they are. There's the festivities, which is to say they're probably mid-orgy. And there they are, getting rid of Caligula. So, I should mention, when they got rid of Caligula, there was this belief that basically evil was in the blood. So they had to get rid of the whole family. So they went around and they killed just about everybody related to him, including like the women and children. Um, it's said that like a soldier took one of his infants, and like grabbed them by the ankles and just smashed their head against the wall. Because that was how you got rid of children back then. You just domed them. Yeah. So surprisingly, the next guy, was Claudius, or not Claudius. I mean, next guy was Claudius. The next guy was Caligula's uncle. They decided that I guess he wasn't too bad, so they didn't kill him and made him emperor. They found him hiding behind a curtain in what was it, in the no, it doesn't say. Place him with his uncle Claudius, hiding in, I guess, the palace, because he's like, well, I guess I'm next. And they, instead of murdering him, it's like, hey, you're the emperor now. Now he was considered a, quote, stammering idiot, which is to say he had a stutter. But at a time when your oral skills were very important in how you're seen by the people, it didn't go well for him. Still though, he was a lot better than Caligula. Uh, while he was in control, Rome conquered Britain, Mauritania, Thrace. He tried to make sure that justice was applied fairly. And then he made the mistake of marrying Nero's mother. And Nero's mother was probably somehow worse than Nero. And so she had him poisoned, and now Nero's in charge. Now, early on in Nero's reign, things were pretty good. There was a literary renaissance. Lots of new literature was written during this time. But then there was an assassination attempt. And Nero cracked down on everything. And considering typically when there's a literary renaissance, they write about everything that's going on in the world at the time, including the leader. And they're not necessarily going to be completely flattering. So anybody that wrote poorly about Nero had to commit suicide. He poisoned Claudius's son, who was like co-emperor or whatever. Married Claudius's daughter and then had her executed because, sure. Kicked one of his mistresses to death, who, if I remember right, was also like pregnant at the time. And after many, many attempts, had his mother killed. One that apparently had like a ship built that once it got far enough into the sea that it dropped sail, a rock, like a heavy weight would drop through and break the ship in half, and it would, sink. But she survived that, and then he sent soldiers out to kill her. And middle, there was a lot of creepy incest going on. Nero was messed up. Like, Caligula and Nero both were. They weren't just like, oh, they're these horrible people. Like, they had really, really horrible childhoods that mentally destroyed them. And then when they became adults, they got basically absolute power, and that made it everyone else's problem. He eventually committed suicide as Roman soldiers closed in to get rid of him. There's of course, well, I'll get to that in a minute. Here is Claudius begging to not be murdered, and the Praetorian Guard being like, "Oh no, we're not going to kill you. We're going to make you emperor," which maybe be worse because you'll still get killed eventually. Yo, they've got Saiyan shoes on. I just noticed that. Look at that. Huh. Look, they got little Saiyan shoes. And then here is supposedly, oh, Nero fiddled while Rome burned. Fiddles didn't exist. He would have played a harp. Also, he wasn't in Rome at the time. Now, that said, he did use the parts of Rome that burned to build this big-ass palace for himself. And then also there was this huge colossus. It literally was called a colossus statue, a colossal statue that was called a colossus because it was so big. And after he died or after he was killed, they tore it down, and that's where the Colosseum was built. The Colosseum is called that because it was where the Colossus statue once was, and they can't forget that that's where this, like, I've seen the head of this thing, and the head wouldn't fit in this room. It's so big. So the reason the Colosseum is called the Colosseum, that's not a word for like an arena. It's a word that is in remembrance of this colossal statue, which is pretty cool. Also, the reason why Nero was such a hard ass about the Christians is that as Christianity was growing, Christians weren't supposed to ever deny that they were Christians. So he was like, oh, well, I can just say the Christians were the ones that started the fire, and that anybody that admits to being a Christian is admitting to starting the fire. Therefore, ask someone if they're a Christian. If they say they are, they admitted to the fire. That was the whole reason behind that. We'll just go ahead and end it here. I've only got a couple of slides left, but we'll do the good emperors later because there's a couple things I want to talk about with that. And then we'll finish the chapter and move on to chapter 6, I guess, which is like gradually going from the Empire to the early Middle Ages. So yeah, that will do it. See ya Wednesday.